A quiet room. People watching. A man laughs loudly. A woman freezes. Humiliated. Then she smiles. He thought embarrassing her was the end of her story. But what she did next silenced the entire room. Everyone in that room thought they knew her. Quiet. Ordinary. Easy to dismiss. And when he laughed at her, no one defended her. Not one person. But what they didn't know was that they had just witnessed the biggest mistake of their lives. Welcome to Prime Tale, where stories don't just entertain. They make you feel. If you love powerful emotional twists that leave you speechless, you're in the right place. Now let's begin. The room felt expensive before anyone even spoke. Soft golden lighting poured down from crystal chandeliers, reflecting off polished marble floors that looked untouched, almost too perfect to walk on. Every detail in the space whispered wealth. Glasses that never stayed empty, tailored suits that fit like armor, conversations that sounded light but carried quiet competition underneath. This wasn't just an event. It was a room full of people who believed they mattered. And in a room like that, presence was everything. Amara noticed it the moment she stepped inside. Not because anyone said anything, but because no one did. Conversations continued, laughter floated through the air, but there was a subtle shift, a kind of invisible scan that passed over her in seconds. The kind people didn't realize they were doing. Judging. Measuring. Dismissing. Her shoes didn't echo like the others. Her outfit didn't shine under the lights. Her confidence didn't demand attention. She walked carefully, holding a slim file close to her chest, as though it anchored her to the moment. Her fingers pressed slightly into the edges, not out of fear, but focus. This mattered. Everything about tonight mattered. She had replayed this moment in her head for weeks. Every step, every word, every possible reaction. What she didn't rehearse was being invisible. Or worse, being seen and dismissed. She paused near the edge of the room, just far enough from the center to avoid attention, but close enough to observe. People formed tight circles, laughing, exchanging names, building alliances in conversations that sounded casual but meant everything. No one invited her in. No one asked who she was. And slowly, that familiar feeling crept in. Not doubt. Not exactly. Something quieter. Something heavier. The feeling of being underestimated before you even begin. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. This is temporary, she told herself silently. You're not here to belong. You're here for a reason. Her eyes moved across the room, scanning faces, noting reactions, memorizing energy. Then, she saw him. Daniel. He didn't blend into the room. He owned it. Standing at the center of a small crowd, he spoke with effortless confidence, one hand casually resting in his pocket while the other moved just enough to control attention. People leaned toward him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. He didn't chase attention. It came to him. His suit was sharp, perfectly fitted. His watch caught the light just enough to remind everyone of its price. But more than that, it was his posture. Relaxed. Certain. Untouchable. Amara had heard about him before tonight. Everyone had. Successful. Influential. Respected. And, depending on who you asked, unforgiving. She watched as he laughed at something someone said. Not a small laugh. Not polite. Loud. Confident. The kind that fills space and demands acknowledgement. And for a moment, she hesitated. Not because she was intimidated, but because she understood something important in that instant. This wasn't just a presentation. This was a test. Not of her idea, but of her presence. And rooms like this didn't reward quiet strength. They challenged it. She adjusted her grip on the file, exhaling slowly. Stay steady, she told herself. Then, movement. A shift in the room. A subtle cue that something was about to begin. People started turning toward the front. Conversations dissolving into anticipation. A staff member gestured politely, signaling the transition from networking to presentation. This was it. Amara's heartbeat didn't race. It slowed. Focused. Sharp. She stepped forward. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough to move from the edge into visibility. And that's when it happened. A voice cut through the air. Wait. The word wasn't loud, but it carried. Enough to pause movement. Enough to redirect attention. Amara stopped. Not fully turning, but enough to feel it. The shift. Then came the second part. Clear. Amused. Unfiltered. She's the presenter? A beat. And then, laughter. It didn't explode all at once. It spread, like a ripple moving through water. Starting small, then building. A few chuckles. Then more. Then unmistakable laughter. Amara didn't need to turn to know who it was. But she did anyway. Slowly. Deliberately. And there he was. Daniel. Looking directly at her. Smiling. But not with kindness. His eyes moved over her. Quick, assessing, dismissive. The kind of look that decides your worth before you speak. He shook his head slightly, letting out another laugh. "This has to be a joke," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. More laughter. Not everyone joined. But no one stopped it. That was enough. Amara felt it. Not as a sudden hit, but as a slow burn rising under her skin. Her fingers tightened around the file again, this time harder. Her mind moved fast. Too fast. Not panicking. Processing. Calculating. Adapting. Every instinct told her to shrink, to step back, to disappear before the moment got worse. But something deeper, stronger, held her in place. Daniel took a step forward, still smiling. "I mean, no offense," he added casually, though everything about his tone carried the opposite. "But this is who we're supposed to take seriously?" A few people laughed again. Others looked away. Uncomfortable. But silent. And that silence was louder than anything else. Because no one stepped in. No one questioned him. No one defended her. In that moment, the room made a decision. And it wasn't in her favor. Amara's chest rose slowly as she inhaled. Her eyes dropped for just a second. Just one. And in that second, the weight of the moment pressed down. Not just the laughter, but everything behind it. Every doubt she had ever faced. Every room where she wasn't expected. Every time she had to prove herself twice as much just to be seen once. It all came back. At once. And for a brief moment. It almost worked. Almost. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Her grip loosened. Her breath slowed. And then. The smile didn't belong in that moment. That was the first thing people noticed. Not the confidence. Not the composure. The smile. Because it made no sense. Moments ago, she had been the center of quiet humiliation. Standing under the weight of laughter that wasn't meant to be subtle. A room full of people had already decided who she was, had already placed her in a category that required no further thought. And yet, she smiled. Not to impress. Not to challenge. But as if something had just become clear to her. The kind of clarity that doesn't come from the room, but from within. The laughter didn't vanish instantly. It faded. Unevenly. Like a sound losing strength as distance grows. Some people stopped first. Others followed. A few held on longer than they should have, forcing amusement that no longer felt natural. Because something had shifted. And no one could quite explain what. Amara didn't rush to speak. That alone created tension. In a room where everyone competed for attention, where people filled silence quickly to maintain control, her stillness became louder than noise. She placed the file gently on the table in front of her. Not dropped. Not slammed. Placed. The movement was controlled, deliberate, almost careful. As if the object itself carried weight beyond paper. Her fingers rested on it for a brief moment before she let go. Then, she looked up. Not scanning the room. Not searching for approval. Looking directly at the space ahead. Centered. grounded, present. Daniel watched her closely now. His posture hadn't changed much. He still stood relaxed, arms loosely positioned, expression tilted toward amusement. But his eyes were different, more focused, less dismissive. He expected a reaction, an apology, a retreat, something predictable. And when it didn't come, his certainty weakened just slightly. Amara finally spoke. "You're right." Her voice was soft, not weak, not hesitant, soft in a way that made people lean in to hear it. The room responded instantly. Conversations died completely. Attention sharpened. Because now, they wanted to hear what came next. A few people exchanged quick glances. Some confused. Some curious. Some already reconsidering their earlier judgment. Daniel let out a short breath, almost a quiet laugh. "Of course I am," he replied casually, though there was a hint of challenge underneath it now. "Go on." He gestured lightly with his hand, inviting her to continue as if he were still in control of the moment. But control had already started slipping. Amara nodded slightly. "You're right," she repeated, her tone steady, unchanged. "I don't look like I belong here." A ripple moved through the room. Not laughter this time. Something else. Recognition. Discomfort. Because she had acknowledged the obvious. But not in a way that surrendered to it. Daniel tilted his head, watching her more carefully now. "Glad we agree," he said. A few weak chuckles followed, but they didn't carry the same energy as before. Amara let the silence sit for a second longer. Then, she took a small step to the side, positioning herself fully behind the table. Subtle, but intentional. It placed her at the center, not physically dominating the room, but anchoring it. Her fingers moved back to the file, slowly opening it. No rush, no nervous movement. Each action felt measured, controlled, and that control began to do something unexpected. It pulled attention toward her, not because she demanded it, but because she refused to chase it. Inside the file were several documents, neatly arranged, precise, prepared. She slid one out, held it briefly, then placed it flat on the table. Again, not dramatically, but with purpose. The sound of paper touching the surface seemed louder now, because the room was completely silent. Daniel's eyes dropped to the document for a fraction of a second, then back to her. "What is this?" he asked, a slight edge creeping into his tone. Amara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted the paper slightly, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table. A small action, but it carried meaning, control, precision, confidence. Then she spoke. "I didn't come here to compete." The sentence landed differently than expected. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't reactive. It was definitive. A few people shifted where they stood. Confusion spread quietly. Because if she wasn't there to compete, then why was she there? Daniel frowned slightly. Not fully. Just enough to show that something wasn't adding up. "Then you're in the wrong room," he said. But the confidence behind the words had thinned. Amara finally looked at him directly again. And this time, she held the eye contact longer. "I don't think so," she replied. Her voice remained calm, unchanged, unaffected. And that calmness began to feel unsettling, because it didn't match the situation they thought they understood. She reached into the file again, pulled out another document, placed it beside the first, then another. Each page aligned carefully, each movement steady. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The table slowly filled, and with every page, the tension in the room grew heavier. Not louder, heavier, like something important was building, but no one knew what it was yet. Daniel stepped forward, not aggressively, but with intention. He wanted a closer look now. Needed it. The distance between confidence and uncertainty had started to close. "You still haven't answered my question," he said. What is this? Amara glanced briefly at the documents, then back at him. A formality, she said. The word hung in the air. Strange. Vague. Unsettling. Daniel let out a short breath. Half laugh. Half disbelief. A formality, he repeated. You expect anyone here to take that seriously? No one laughed this time. That was the difference. Not because the comment wasn't meant to be dismissive, but because the room no longer knew how to react. Amara's expression didn't change. Not even slightly. And that lack of reaction began to take control of the moment. She placed one final document on the table. Centered. Perfectly aligned with the others. Then, she removed her hand slowly, letting the papers sit untouched. Visible. Present. Real. And for the first time, she shifted her focus away from Daniel, looking instead toward the rest of the room. Not scanning. Not searching. Just acknowledging. You're all here for opportunity, she said. Her voice carried now. Not louder, but clearer. Stronger. And so am I. The statement felt simple, but it carried weight, because it reframed everything. She wasn't there by accident. She wasn't there to prove she belonged. She was there. With purpose. With intention. With something they hadn't yet understood. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Just enough to notice. Because now, he wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. Amara took a slow breath. Then said the words that changed everything. I came here. A pause. Perfectly timed. Long enough to pull every ounce of attention in the room toward her. Because this company is already mine. Silence. Not the kind that fades in. The kind that drops. Heavy. Immediate. Absolute. No whispers. No movement. No reactions. Just stillness. For a second. No one processed it. The words didn't land. They hovered. Waiting. Then, the shift began. Eyes widened. Brows furrowed. People looked at each other, trying to confirm what they had just heard. Daniel blinked once. Then again. A small movement. But telling. Because this time, there was no laughter. No immediate response. Just confusion. Sharp. Uncomfortable. What did you just say? He asked. And for the first time, his voice didn't sound certain. Amara didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. Instead, she gently turned one of the documents toward the table's edge, angling it outward, making it visible, accessible, an invitation, or a challenge. Page 3, she said quietly. That was it. No explanation. No emphasis. Just 2 words. But those 2 words carried more weight than anything said before. Because now, the room had to look. And once they did, everything would change. The room held its breath. For a moment, the air itself seemed heavier, denser, as though time had slowed and every eye was forced to focus on the single movement of her hand. The papers lay on the table, neatly stacked, each one precise, unassuming, yet somehow monumental. Daniel's gaze darted between the documents and Amara's calm face. His smirk, which had dominated every previous encounter, was gone, replaced by something sharper. Curiosity edged with fear. The laughter from minutes ago was a distant memory now, replaced by a tense quiet that seemed almost impossible to break. People leaned forward, involuntarily, drawn by the magnetism of the unfolding moment. Some shifted their weight from foot to foot, unsure how to process the situation. Whispers started, soft and hesitant, as the room tried to fill the silence without fully understanding it. Did she? How is this possible? No way. Their words trailed off, disappearing into the tension that thickened by the second. Daniel's hand twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly, betraying the anxiety he refused to acknowledge. He had faced competitors before. He had crushed ambitious strangers before. But this This was different. Amara's movements were deliberate. She slid the first document toward the board members seated at the table, just enough for them to catch a glimpse of the header. The paper itself was unremarkable, white, professional, orderly, but it carried authority. Legal authority. Financial authority. Power. A board member picked it up hesitantly. Eyes scanning, furrowing, widening. A soft intake of breath. Then another. One by one, the others leaned closer, tracing the text with incredulous disbelief. Daniel stepped forward, forcing his way between curiosity and confrontation. "Let me see that," he said, his voice firm but lacking its usual confidence. He grabbed the top sheet. His fingers brushed the corner with a mixture of arrogance and skepticism, assuming this was another prank, a clever bluff. But the moment he read the first lines, his face began to change. Subtly at first, a twitch of the lip, a narrowing of the eyes. Then more obvious. Confusion. Disbelief. Panic, restrained but unmistakable. Where? How? He stumbled, searching for words that could challenge the undeniable truth before him. This isn't possible. Amara's gaze never wavered. Her voice was steady, controlled, as if she were narrating a story, not responding to a man who had tried to humiliate her in front of everyone. "I acquired controlling shares 3 weeks ago," she said softly, deliberately, letting each word land with precision. "This company belongs to me now." Gasps swept across the room. The staff, the board members, the attendees, all frozen in varying stages of shock. Eyes widened. Fingers fidgeted. Heads tilted. Some people instinctively whispered to one another, as though by acknowledging it aloud, they could somehow deny the truth. Daniel blinked rapidly, trying to comprehend. His mind raced, flipping through scenarios he had believed were impossible. None of them made sense. None of them justified what was happening before his very eyes. You can't," he finally muttered. His voice was no longer confident. No one laughed. No one nodded. They all stared, as if the air itself carried the weight of her revelation. Amara reached into the file again, pulling out another document and placing it beside the first. This one was a set of contracts, signatures, approvals. Legally binding. Undeniable. She didn't say anything. Her silence amplified the moment. The absence of explanation, the absence of fear, the absence of panic, was far more powerful than any outburst could have been. The camera, or in the mind's eye the audience watching, could see Daniel's shifting emotions. He was trying to regain dominance, to reassert control, but every attempt fell flat against the calm certainty radiating from Amara. The room no longer responded to him. It responded to her. One of the board members, trembling slightly, reached for the next document. This shows everything," she murmured. She owns the majority." The whispers grew. She bought controlling shares? 3 weeks ago. How did we not know? Daniel's jaw tightened. He straightened his posture, trying to recover his presence. But each second he hesitated, each micro-expression betrayed his inner panic. The balance had shifted. He was no longer the anchor of the room. She was. Amara finally spoke again, her voice calm, almost melodic in its precision. "You might want to read page 3. Heads bent. Eyes scanned. Gasps followed. Faces paled. The realization hit slowly, painfully, in waves. This was no bluff. No mistake. No accident. This was intentional. Calculated. Executed with perfection. Daniel's face lost its color. His smirk was gone. His confidence evaporated like mist. He stepped back slightly, suddenly aware that he had underestimated her completely. Every moment of laughter, every gesture of mockery, had been a mistake he would not forget. The room, previously buzzing with casual conversation, social jockeying, and quiet hierarchy, now stood frozen. People didn't move. They didn't speak. They only watched as Amara, the woman they had quietly dismissed, the one they thought powerless, revealed control so absolute it left the entire space in stunned silence. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't boast. Her power was quiet, unshakable, undeniable. And in that quiet power she delivered the final blow without a word. The fact remained she had the upper hand. The room, the people, Daniel himself, had no choice but to acknowledge it. For the first time, Daniel realized something crucial. The game had changed. His laughter, his arrogance, his assumed superiority, none of it mattered anymore. She had already won. And she hadn't even begun to play fully. Amara's eyes swept across the room, landing briefly on each person's face. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stood, calm, composed, commanding respect without uttering another word. In that silence, every attendee understood the unspoken truth. This woman, underestimated, quiet, seemingly ordinary, was the most powerful person in the room. And Daniel, who thought he had orchestrated every social cue, every impression, was now just another observer of her victory. The room was frozen. Not in a dramatic pause, not in a cinematic exaggeration, but in real palpable tension. Every whisper, every rustle of paper, every subtle movement seemed amplified, as if the air itself had thickened around Amara. Daniel's mind raced, frantically replaying the past few minutes. How had this happened? How had he, a man used to controlling every room, every impression, every reaction, been stripped of his dominance in a matter of moments? The answer was staring him in the face. And it burned. Amara didn't speak. Not yet. She didn't need to. The room hung on her presence alone. The quiet authority she exuded was magnetic. People leaned in subconsciously, drawn to her calm energy. Even the whispers of doubt, those hesitant murmurs trying to confirm the reality, were absorbed into the weight of her silence. Then one of the board members, a seasoned woman who usually radiated authority herself, cleared her throat, breaking the initial shock. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the next document. The motion was careful, hesitant, as though touching it might somehow confirm the truth too violently. She scanned the pages, her eyes widening incrementally with each paragraph. The realization hit her, and then her colleagues. This wasn't a simple acquisition. This was complete, controlling, absolute. Every measure, every legal nuance, every signature in place. The proof sat plainly on the table, undeniable. Daniel tried to speak. This changes nothing, he said, voice slightly unsteady, the steel edge he had relied on slipping. His posture, once commanding, now felt smaller. The room no longer responded to him. Their eyes, which had previously followed his every movement, now tracked Amara. Amara's gaze shifted briefly to him. Calm, piercing, unwavering. Her voice finally broke the silence. Low, controlled, but perfectly audible to all. It changes everything. The words weren't just a statement. They were a verdict. The room instinctively recognized them as such. There was no argument, no negotiation, no challenge possible. She didn't need to raise her voice or embellish her authority with theatrics. Her presence, combined with the documents, had already done the work. A murmur ran through the attendees. Heads turned. People whispered urgently to one another. Daniel's allies, those who had subtly supported his earlier mockery, stared in disbelief. Their confidence faltered. The social hierarchy that had seemed so rigid just moments ago was dissolving. Amara extended one hand, gesturing toward the documents, letting them occupy space without speaking further. Her movements were deliberate. They conveyed precision, control, and intent. Every motion she made reinforced the reality everyone in the room now had to face. She was in charge. Daniel's breathing quickened slightly. His mind raced for a way to reclaim control, but every instinct failed. He had underestimated her. Not just underestimated her ideas or her capabilities, but underestimated her ability to shift the balance of power simply by being calm, deliberate, and fully prepared. Amara spoke again, softly, directing her words to the entire room now, not just Daniel. As of today, all decisions concerning this company will follow my direction. I will oversee operations, strategy, and growth. And the first decision I make will set the tone for everything moving forward. The room reacted instantly. The air felt charged. Everyone understood the weight behind the words. There was no room for doubt, no option for disagreement. She wasn't asking for permission. She wasn't negotiating. She was declaring reality. Daniel swallowed hard, his ego taking a hit he wasn't used to. His usual tactics, smirks, subtle intimidation, social dominance, no longer applied. He had been dismantled by calm precision and strategic foresight. One of the younger executives, someone who had previously laughed along with Daniel, leaned toward a colleague and whispered, I don't think he's going to recover from this." Amara didn't flinch at the comment, didn't acknowledge it. She let it hang in the air. Silence is often louder than words, and in this room, every second of quiet amplified her authority. Daniel attempted to regain composure, standing straighter, speaking louder. "You can't just, this is." He stopped mid-sentence, realizing the futility. No one was listening to him anymore. Their attention was fixed entirely on Amara. Every pair of eyes had shifted allegiance, whether consciously or not. Amara leaned slightly forward, placing a final document at the center of the table. It wasn't a show of force. It was precision. It completed the visual narrative she had been crafting the entire time. She was prepared, she was in control, and the facts were undeniable. Then she paused, long enough for the room to absorb the shift fully. Long enough for Daniel to see that the game had completely changed. He was no longer the orchestrator. He was an observer. A man realizing for the first time in his life that influence and presence are not just built on confidence. They are built on preparation, foresight, and unwavering calm under scrutiny. The board members began to murmur among themselves, confirming the details, aligning on the new reality. Contracts were flipped, signatures rechecked, numbers validated. The room, which had previously buzzed with casual networking energy, now existed entirely in the space she defined. Finally, she raised her eyes, scanning the room. Not in challenge, not in arrogance, but in quiet mastery. Her gaze landed on Daniel, calm and precise, and it was enough. No words were necessary. The message was clear. Underestimating her had been the gravest mistake anyone could make here. Daniel's smirk, his confidence, his previously unshakable presence. It all faltered under the weight of the truth she had established without a single raised voice, without any theatrics, without needing validation from anyone else. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted. She had entered the room underestimated, mocked, dismissed, and she was now the uncontested focal point of authority. And the most humiliating realization for Daniel was simple. He had watched it happen. He had witnessed the moment when everyone's attention and allegiance transferred to someone he had tried to belittle, and there was nothing he could do to reclaim it. Amara stepped back slightly, allowing the board and attendees to process the magnitude of her presence fully. She didn't smile, she didn't taunt, she didn't celebrate. The victory wasn't performative, it was real. Solid. Absolute. Every individual in the room understood, instantly and irrevocably, that this woman had rewritten the social and power dynamics entirely in her favor. The quiet that followed was profound. Not awkward, not tense, but heavy with realization. The room had shifted. The hierarchy had changed. And Amara, calm, composed, strategically precise, stood at the center, unshaken, unchallenged, and entirely in control. The room was no longer just quiet. It had transformed into a space suspended between disbelief and anticipation. Every person present could feel the invisible weight of Amara's authority pressing down, subtle but undeniable. Even the chandeliers seemed to hang lower, casting a golden haze over the scene, as though the light itself recognized the shift that had occurred. Daniel's face had shifted through a spectrum of emotions in mere moments. First shock, then anger, then disbelief, and now a creeping panic he refused to admit. The arrogance that had defined him in every boardroom, every social gathering, every interaction where he had wielded dominance effortlessly, evaporated. Gone. In its place, a raw, uncomfortable awareness. He was no longer in control. Amara, meanwhile, stood calm and poised behind the table. Her hands rested lightly on the documents she had arranged earlier. Her eyes scanned the room, not with judgment, but with clarity, as though evaluating the situation from a vantage point only she could access. Each person's reaction, Each twitch of hesitation, every small gasp of disbelief, they all confirmed the truth she had already established. She stepped forward slightly, closing the space between herself and the table. The subtle shift carried immense symbolic weight. She was not just a participant anymore. She was the center of command, the axis around which the entire room now turned. As of today, she began, her voice calm but resonant, I will be making all key decisions for this company. Operations, strategy, growth. The responsibility lies with me. Every initiative, every resource allocation, every opportunity. Her gaze swept slowly across the room, pausing deliberately on each person, including Daniel. Will be guided by the directives I set. The statement landed like a hammer. Not because of its volume but because of the authority behind it. She did not ask permission. She did not seek acknowledgement. She did not even pause for reactions. The reality of her words carried itself, and the room absorbed it in stunned silence. Daniel tried to recover, stepping forward with an almost reflexive assertiveness. You can't just walk in, and this is his words stumbled, faltered. He struggled to maintain the confidence he had always wielded effortlessly. But the room was no longer his. The attention he commanded before now followed Amara entirely. Amara lifted a hand slightly, not aggressively, not commanding, but to acknowledge his attempt. You may speak, she said, her tone even, almost serene. But understand this. Influence is not inherited through arrogance or laughter. It is earned through precision, foresight, and execution. Which, as you can see, I have done. The room collectively exhaled. Some in relief, some in awe, and some in the dawning realization that they had underestimated her entirely. Daniel's smirk, which had always been a weapon, faltered. He took a deep breath, trying to assert control with presence alone, but every micro-expression betrayed his inner disarray. One of the senior board members, who had watched the unfolding events with a mixture of fascination and apprehension, finally spoke. Her voice was deliberate, tinged with both respect and shock. Ms. Amara, we need to confirm the documentation, the acquisition. Everything appears legitimate. This is extraordinary. Amara inclined her head slightly. Everything is legitimate, complete, transparent, verified. She let the words linger, allowing their weight to settle into every corner of the room. And now, she continued, her eyes meeting Daniel's once more, it is time for accountability. The term hung in the air like a gavel striking a bench. Accountability. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration, one that rippled through the room with immediate psychological impact. Every person who had once sided with Daniel, laughed along with him, or quietly allowed the mockery to continue felt the shift. Daniel's jaw tightened. His posture stiffened. For the first time, he realized that this was not about winning a debate, about asserting dominance with charm, or commanding attention with humor. This was about consequences. The humiliation he had attempted to impose on Amara had now returned upon himself in a far more permanent and irreversible way. Amara stepped slightly to the side, drawing the room's attention fully to the documents on the table. These papers are not just contracts, she said softly, yet with absolute clarity. They represent responsibility, commitment, and strategic control. And as such, the first action I will take as the person in charge is to ensure that every decision moving forward aligns with accountability. Not favoritism, not ego, not arrogance, but accountability. The weight of her words pressed into the room. The murmurs that had begun as disbelief slowly transformed into agreement, even from those who had initially doubted her. Heads nodded subtly. Conversations paused. The shift was complete. Amara had seized the room entirely. Daniel attempted one last intervention, his voice rising slightly. You can't just this doesn't he stopped abruptly as the room collectively turned to him, eyes unwavering, silently demanding recognition of the new reality. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone conveyed the finality of the situation. She glanced at him with steady, unflinching eyes, and the message was unmistakable. The time for mockery, arrogance, and undermining her authority was over. The room absorbed the impact. Every individual present understood, instinctively, that Amara was no longer the one underestimated. She was the pivot upon which the power dynamics had shifted completely. The laughter, the whispered judgments, the casual dismissals, all had been replaced with awareness, respect, and a quiet but undeniable fear of miscalculation. Daniel's face flushed. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it, and then exhaled slowly. Every instinct he had relied on to dominate interactions failed. He was no longer in command. He was a witness. A man confronted with the tangible consequences of underestimating someone whose preparation, clarity, and calm precision had eclipsed his arrogance entirely. Amara's hands returned to rest lightly on the table. She did not lean forward, she did not gesture broadly, she simply existed there in the room, fully composed. And in that composure, she radiated a magnetic authority that drew every eye, every thought, every silent measure of attention toward her. The first public confrontation had concluded. The room recognized it immediately. And in that recognition, Daniel understood he had lost, utterly and completely.